Yesterday we talked about this anti-white bias in the courts, but really it's all over the place. It's the reason white people can't get jobs in many cases, the reason why many white people are unable to provide for their families. They fall into despair and die of suicide and drug overdoses at a rate that...
That is entirely true, that there are large percentages of white people who are suffering, for sure. What does that have to do with them experiencing racial subjugation on a daily basis? Could it have a lot more to do with a lot of other factors? You know? There's like, why don't you want to raise the minimum wage? That'll help poor white people. Why don't you want to strengthen unions? That'll help poor white people. Why don't you want to have a jobs program, a mandatory jobs program, or a government jobs program that has jobs available to anyone who wants them? That'll help more poor white people, right? It's not that they're going into applications and they're like, oh shit, you're white. Yeah, sorry, no, I thought you were black. Yeah, nah, we can't do this one. Yeah, no. Not, I mean, no, I'm sure you're qualified. It's just like, yeah, no, sorry, we're only looking for a black guy.
If you open any history textbook in this country, you'll learn that the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement was supposedly the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And for the first time in American history, the law banned discrimination based on race, particularly in the context of employment. And from that point forward, we were told businesses would not be allowed to hire or fire people because they were black or white or Asian or whatever. It was supposedly the dawn of a new era. Lyndon Johnson might have escalated our role in Vietnam, but at least he finished what JFK started and signed the Civil Rights Act, and we should all be thankful for that. That is the comic book version of civil rights law anyway, which also happens to be what pretty much everybody believes to this day. The truth is different, though. The truth is that in 2023, the Civil Rights Act is not simply a dead letter. It is a document so defunct, so pointless, so irrelevant, that it stopped prohibiting racist employment discrimination several years ago, and no one even noticed when it happened. At least since 2020, and probably much earlier, the largest corporations in this country have openly discriminated against white people solely on the basis of skin color.
What?
And to be clear, we're not talking about quote-unquote holistic discrimination or discrimination at the margins here. We're talking about a de facto, near total ban on hiring white people. Whoa. So here are the numbers. And there's no need to, hype this up or use hyperbole, because the numbers by themselves are shocking, like hard to believe.
Sure.
In 2021, the largest public companies in the United States, meaning the companies in the S&P 100, they hired collectively 300,000 people in that year. Now, of those 300,000 people, only 6% of them were white.
What?
So a total of 94% of them were so-called people of color, meaning blacks, Hispanics, and so on.
Wait, so
now,
were they,
this is data so extreme that it doesn't even seem to be real, even if you know that anti-white discrimination is a real problem and it's happening in this country and it's, mainstream. Even if you knew that, when you hear these numbers, it's, again, hard to believe. These are the kinds of numbers that appear at first glance to be impossible, but they're not impossible. The biggest corporations in the United States with the best funded legal...
Fortune 500 CEOs, 2000 to 2020, still male, still white. What? Back in 1963, when a husband came in, blah, blah, blah. Since 2000, there have been 151 white women and people of color appointed to CEOs at Fortune 500 companies. We have called them the new CEOs to emphasize that they are not like old CEOs, white males. But now, 20 years later, the new CEOs are not so new. There are enough of them that it is impossible or possible to step back and look at patterns that have emerged over these 2 decades. Numbers for some groups have increased, such as white women and South Asians, but the numbers in those groups, such as African Americans, Mexican Americans, and East Asians, have remained stagnant or decreased. The big picture, white men and everyone else. So here we have white male CEOs, and here we have the new CEOs. The big picture is almost 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are still white males, can be seen in figure 1. The slow increase for the new CEOs from total 19 to 2000. Okay, but these are CEOs, right? He's talking about, so white women are apparently the fastest growing group of anyone, but then all the other groups are kind of being left behind or declining. Even as the number of new CEOs are rising, white women make a large portion of these appointees. Okay, maybe let's look it up. Well, no, he didn't say CEOs. He said of the 300,000 people, right? So, what's the percentage of white hires at corporations? White people are the majority of the U.S. workforce. 77% of the U.S. workforce is white. What? No, that would be in direct contradiction to what he's talking about. Groups formerly seen as minorities may reach majority status by 2045. 48% of Generation Z are racial or ethnic minorities. Diverse companies enjoy 2.5% higher cash flow per employee. Woke indoctrination, fake news. Diverse management is shown to increase revenue by 19%. Fucking more fucking anti-white racism right here. Gender diverse companies and executive teams outperform less gender diverse peers. Fucking yeah, sexism here towards dudes. Some Sandre. 3 in 4 job seekers and workers prefer diverse companies and co-workers. Anti-white racism right there. The population of white people is decreasing. See, this is what we were talking about. Yep, they were right. The whole conspiracy came true. White people will no longer be the U.S. racial majority by 2045. Well, yeah, but that's because of the white genocide. 1 in 3 Americans will be non-white by 2060. Jesus Christ, the white genocide is accelerating. Generation Z and millennials include more racial and ethnic minorities. Millennials are 90% more diverse than baby boomers. Minority populations are more likely to be unemployed. Unemployment rate is higher amongst Black and Hispanic or Latin populations based on 2020 census data. The U.S. employment rate sits at approximately 8.1%. Meanwhile, average U.S. unemployment rates were higher for people who were Black at 11.5%, Hispanic or Latin at 10.6%. 7.6% of people with disabilities were unemployed in 2022. 5.6% of foreign-born workers were unemployed in 2021. 7.4% of people with less than a high school diploma are unemployed in 2023. Within the same age and education group, the highest unemployment rate was found amongst Black people at 9.8%. Families and couple often face significant financial hardships. 21.5% of families didn't have one family member employed in 2021. That percentage goes to 23.4% if it happens to be a Black family. 1 in 4 heterosexual married couple families live on a single income. 18.2% of heterosexual married couple families, only the husband was employed. Almost half of U.S. employees are women. Women are more likely to experience workplace bias. Well, that's just fucking sexist towards men. Women are more likely to be in C-suite roles. That's fucking, once again, sexist towards men. I mean, men are just, naturally gifted better leaders, so they should be in those positions. It just makes sense. Women are achieving higher levels in the workforce. Women are increasingly likely to be hired with anonymous applications. What? They have to be anonymous? Well, that's because women are liars. Women obtain 4-year college degrees more than men. That's because the schools discriminate against dudes. Obviously, misandry once again. Senior level women are twice as likely as senior level men to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, that's because they're trying to contribute to the white genocide. That's what explains that. White people are the majority of the U.S. workforce. 77% of the U.S. workforce is white. Oh. Black people make up 13% of the workforce, and Asian people make up 7% of the workforce as of 2021. 6 Fortune 500 companies have a Black CEO. 6 of 500. People of color are more likely to experience workplace bias. Well, that's probably because they're lazy. Candidates with distinctive Black names are less likely to move forward in the interview process. Like, the bit over, I think everyone can fucking see that, like, obviously, I'm trying to find the statistic he's talking about. If I type in 300,000 hires, only 6% were white. I see a Reddit post that talks about it. I see moviechat.org has that stat. A bodybuilding forum has that stat. The UNS review, I don't know what that is. The Free Press. I haven't seen an actual... Oh, 4chan. It's on 4chan. So on the 4chan boards. Okay, so according to 4chan, 94% of new corporate jobs in 2023 went to BIPOC. 94% of new corporate jobs. So powerful. Interesting.
Implemented this virtually absolute ban on hiring whites without any regard.
The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. By race, white people made up the most of the labor force, 77%. Black and Asians constituted an additional 13% and 7% respectively. American Indians and Alaskan Natives make up 1% of the labor force, while Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders accounted for less than 0.5%. People who were 2 or more races made up 2% of the labor force. Amongst Asian participants in the labor force, the largest group was Asian Indian, making up 25% of all Asians. Chinese made up 22%, followed by Filipinos, Vietnamese, Koreans, Japanese. The remainder 18% were classified as other Asians, a category that includes other Asians groups not listed above. Amongst the race and ethnicity groups, the percentage of the population is either unemployed or employed. Labor force participation rate was highest amongst Native Hawaiians and the Pacific Islanders. Employment, education, attainment. I'd say this is the one group in which a non-white category is higher, because here we have white 43, Asian 67. In 2021, 58% of the employed Asian worked in management, professional related occupations. Highest paying was occupational category, compared to 43% of whites, 34% of the blacks, 25% of Hispanics. Industry unemployment, much higher for Black people, much higher for indigenous people. Unemployment rates, not in the labor force. Black comprised 13% of the civilian labor force and 22% of people marginally attached to the labor force in 2021. Those marginally attached to the labor force are not individuals who were in the labor force, but they wanted to work and were available to work, had been looking for a job in the previous 12 months. And then there's the differences in earnings, highest obviously for white men. Could all be fake news. It is a government website. So there's that.
To the hallowed Civil Rights Act. And there was not a single news story about it. There was not a single member of Congress of either party who paid any attention to the fact that 94% of new hires among the biggest corporations in the United States were non-white. Now, to be fair, as this was happening, companies in the...
Do you have a link to this? Can I see where your source is? Biggest corporations in the country need a toll on white people. Become a Daily Wire member. Like and subscribe. Watch the full episode. Stop giving money to woke corporations that hate you. Get Jeremy's razors here. Watch my hit documentary, What is a Woman? Represent the sweet baby game. Oh, God. Into the diaper fetish.
S&P 100 insisted that they weren't targeting whites in particular. For example, here's one Apple executive telling the Washington Post that their main goal in the era of George Floyd is not to...
Oh, wow. Thank you, Roller Dragon. Look at this. We have a source. Corporations in America kept its promise to hire more people of color. For a brief moment in 2020, much of corporate America united around a common goal to address the stark racial imbalances in their workplace. Mass protests sparked by the murder of George Floyd led to a flurry of company promises, both specific and vague, to hire and promote more black people and others from underrepresented groups. New analysis shows that in the year after the protests, the biggest public companies added over 300,000 jobs, and 94% of them went to people of color. All right, so he's not lying. Good to know. Read the big take. I mean, just so we're clear, by the way, this doesn't demonstrate that they necessarily discriminated exclusively against white people, because as we stated before, white people make up 77% of the workforce already. In total, they increased their U.S. workforce by 323,094 people, the first year since Black Lives Matter, since the date exists. The overall job growth includes 20,524 white workers and 302,570 jobs, or 94% of the headcount increase went to people of color. People of color make up the minority of the U.S. population, and in most cases are underrepresented in big U.S. companies. In 2021, Hispanic, Asian, and Black people made up a vast majority of added workers, a trend that analysts say is necessary to overcome their historic underrepresentation. Oh, so now I see why he's spinning it this way. Because it's not the biggest shifts happened in less senior job categories. White people held fewer of those roles in 2021 than they did in 2020, whereas thousands of people of color were added to the ranks. But the trend continued up the job ladder to top high-paid jobs too. Companies increased their racial diversity amongst executives, managers, and professionals. White people still hold a disproportionate share of the top highly paid jobs at the US and S&P top 100 companies, but the share of executive, managerial, and professional roles held by people of color increased by 2 percentage points compared to 2020. So when it comes to actual, like the ownership class, the ruling class, or the management class, we're still looking at an increase by 2 percentage points. More than double the average annual gains at big and mid-sized US companies in previous years. So the majority of the professional class, the managerial class, 63% white, 57% white. Less senior roles, 48% white. So this is the bigger one that decreased, that Matt Walsh is really mad about. The group of companies in our data set employs more than 9 million people in the US, some of the country's largest and most lucrative firms in industries, tech to finance, including Apple, Walmart. These are astounding percentages. The reason for these changes are complex and may be unique to a specific moment in time. In 2021, companies were hiring lots of people while prioritizing diversity. Many have since cut jobs amid economic slowdown, but just as a backlash to corporate diversity effort grows. While the biggest shift in 2021 happened to lower paying job categories such as sales, workers, and admins, the trend occurred in well-paid and powerful managerial and professional roles. Even at the executive level, more than half the added jobs went to workers of color. Black workers, who were the initial focus of the diversity push, made some particularly notable gains. Their share of managers and professionals increased at 70 companies, including to our data set, and they boosted their ranks amongst executives at nearly many firms. Who sees this and sees this as a horrifying or bad thing? You know? Like, I don't know why you would read this and immediately think, well, this is white racism. It's like, according to the same stats and data, white people make up 77% of the workforce, and there's a massive, massive diversity problem amongst a lot of these companies. They took it amongst themselves to want to hire more diverse teams. They've done that. They haven't fired white people to replace their jobs. As far as I know, the corporation doesn't say that. It's not as if they fired all the white folk and then all of a sudden they let people of color enter the workforce, and that was like the abomination. But even with the one-time gains and losses representing a relatively small slice of the picture, the share of executive, managerial, and professional roles held by people of color increased by only 2 percentage points. This is a really important thing, by the way, when you talk about structural power and you know, the managerial class, the owning class, the CEOs, the bosses, the executives. I mean, that increased at a very, very small rate. Whereas there was a lot of hiring of people and diversity, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, by the way. There's nothing wrong with hiring black people to work in your companies, you know. So this 2 percentage points for the actual, you know, executive, managerial, and professional roles is not exactly, you know, just the game has changed. And that's compared to 2020. That still leaves most companies in our data set lopsided, with white people holding a disproportionate share of high-paying jobs at the S&P 100 companies. So you still have supremacy, Matt, you know? Even if it doesn't move the needle much overall, it shows something happened. If it has a long-term impact, that remains to be seen. So imagine seeing all this and then immediately thinking, you know what this is? This is white racism. No one's talking about this either. No one's talking about this. And then it's like, well, I'm sure some people are maybe celebrating having more diverse workforces.
Punish anyone. Instead, Apple said they just want to honor the victims of supposed racial injustice and create a more equitable playing field. Watch.
So Apple's taken an holistic approach, a sort of approach to criminal justice, education, small business, or economic empowerment. Why this approach as opposed to, say, a more concentrated approach that focuses on one of those issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we wanted to try to touch the places where we thought we could have impact. And in honor of how this all got started, you know, our Racial Equity and Justice Initiative is 3 years old. It started in the wake of the George Floyd, the Breonna Taylor deaths, and we wanted to honor their encounters with the criminal justice system, which were so deeply unfair, to say that those murders, as they happen, should also, there should be work done in that area as well.
Yes, we have to honor them. We have to honor these scumbags. We have to honor these criminals, drug addicts, and drug dealers. We have to honor them.
Jesus.
We have to honor them by making sure that only 6% of our jobs go to white people. By the way, white people still account for, I think, like 70% of the U.S. population in total.
And 77% of the workforce. What? You like... Oh no, they hired a whole bunch more people of color, and now they actually have jobs in a lot of these corporations, not in any executive managerial positions, but you know, they're in the companies now. White people still account for the overwhelming majority of people who work in the companies. If they didn't fire white people specifically, I don't see in any way, shape, or form how you have a leg to stand on here. Like,
so that's 6% of the jobs going to 70% of the population. Now, on the other end, black Americans account for about 13% of the population. And if you see a disparity where only 6% of a certain kind of job are going to 13% of the population, we're told that this...
Cenk is running for president of the United States. All right, I'll check it out afterwards.
This is a massive, massive problem. And this is systemic racism. So 6% to 13% would be systemic racism, terrible, awful, it's slavery, it's Jim Crow. But 6% of jobs going to 70%.
What are you talking about? Like, you're using a lot of terms without actually applying their meaning. You know? Like, it's like if I said a sentence, like, grapes are the feeling of being purple. Like, I've said words, but that doesn't actually have any meaning behind the sentence, you know?
Now, well, that's there's nothing to see here. The executive at Apple goes on and on with a bunch of platitudes, and she never mentions that the S&P 100 is going to unperson hundreds of millions of white people effectively. She never says that Apple...
94% of jobs are going to 13% of the population. No, that is not what this demonstrates whatsoever. As the statistics clearly demonstrate, at this point in time, the workforce comprises of 77% white population, And his statistic is that the population of the United States is 70% white. Therefore, they actually are overrepresented in the workforce, contrary to his complaint. And then there was an initiative that was taken to hire more people of color in a variety of different fields and companies. And that has resulted in a larger percentage of people of color now being at lower level positions within those companies. The executive class, the managerial class, the owning class of all those corporations is still overwhelmingly white and male. That hasn't changed either.
Apple is going to start running ads with a diverse array of overweight, multicultural actors having a little sit down with an obese rendition of Mother Earth. Apple, like so many other companies in the S&P 100, tried to keep its hatred of white people under wraps, and for the most part, they succeeded. We only know about...
None of them said that they had hiring policies that specifically discriminated against white people, though, as in they wouldn't hire white people specifically. They hired more people, and like this is more in addition to 1 + 1 is 2.
What's happened here because of an article in the left-wing Bloomberg News, of all places. And incredibly enough, this was not an article condemning the overt racist discrimination of the S&P 100. Not at all. This was not a breathtaking piece of investigative journalism that demanded answers as to why the most powerful corporations were not hiring whites because they're whites.
That never happened, though. You'd have to demonstrate that, right? You'd have to show that there had been thousands upon thousands of white people who were told they were not hired because they were white in this specific instance for any of that to be true.
Instead, the article from Bloomberg made this racial discrimination sound like a great thing. Bloomberg endorsed it, more or less. Here's the headline from Bloomberg News. And again, this is the only reason we even know about this. The only outlet reporting on the fact that only 6% of the jobs went to white people is
not exactly an independent, no-known source, though. And it's kind of weird how it was being regurgitated on 4chan and all these other websites I've never even heard of. But Bloomberg, yes, that's a big source.
It's Bloomberg, but here's how they framed it. Corporate America promised to hire a lot more people of color. It actually did. The relief from Bloomberg was palpable. Thank God that thousands of white people didn't get hired in 2021, Bloomberg was saying. In fact, Bloomberg went a step further than that. Bloomberg also published the story under a banner reading equality. So they acted like it's a win for equality to reject the vast majority of white applicants. That's equality.
No, didn't
because
say that
nothing
either.
screams equality like preventing white people from getting jobs. That's equality.
What?
What Bloomberg did is collect data from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which by law requires that large companies report their demographics to the government. And in the interest of full disclosure, we have to note that we haven't seen all this data because Bloomberg hasn't published all of it. And a lot of this is not posted by the government online either. But from what Bloomberg has disclosed and from publicly available records, we can make a few determinations. And for one thing, and this is
yeah, so this whole thing is definitely the feels over the reals, right? I mean, hey, I see something like that. You know, the first thing I think, white racism, white genocide. That's all that this says. You know, the numbers are right there. It speaks for themselves.
Minor point, but it's important to make it anyway. From what we can tell, the data appears to be counting Hispanics as people of color. So you'll notice that when Hispanics commit violent crimes like running over...
Okay, what is it, Matt? You can't have it both ways, all right? You can't both say in one breath that, like, well, so Hispanics are white people if they're white or technically white, but if they commit violent crimes, then they're less white, then they're undesirable.
For retired ex-police chiefs with stolen cars, for example, they're listed as white on official records.
Oh, okay.
But in this case, they're considered people of color. Make of that what you will. So if
Citation,
they get a job,
I made it up.
they're a person of color. If they commit a crime, they're white.
Gotcha.
The other point, more important, though, is that Bloomberg's data only captures hiring by companies in the S&P 100. And that includes some of the most recognizable and biggest companies, of course, in the world, like Apple, Amazon, AT&T, ExxonMobil, Citigroup, CVS, Boeing, and so on. But it doesn't include the vast majority of companies in this country, including small businesses. In all, Bloomberg reports, the corporations of the S&P 100 hired around 320,000 people in 2021. For comparison, that year, the U.S. economy added around 6 million jobs overall. So what are all the other businesses in this country doing? Are they also rejecting white people because they don't have enough melanin in their skin?
You have yet to prove that anyone has been discriminated against for being white and not hired specifically because they were white.
That's a very good question. It's one that Bloomberg doesn't answer. From what we can tell, looking at
Yeah, it's all feelings. Well, they don't actually outright prove that or say it. We can certainly infer that that's what happened. You can picture, you know, a Tom or a Michael or a Jim going into the job interview and then immediately being rejected upon seeing how low the melanin was. They probably even said it to them, you know, like, get out of here, whitey, and then they had to leave. It's
data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Thankfully, the answer right now is no. So this trend seems to be limited to the largest companies in the S&P 100 overall.
So wait, sorry. So like, this isn't even a problem. This was one specific push by a bunch of companies to try and add more diversity to their workforce, which they did. And then now you're saying that's white racism. And then you're like, but overall, if we look at all the jobs, this isn't happening. White people are still getting overwhelmingly hired and hired to a higher percentage. So that's good. That's good. It's all right. All right. You know, white supremacy is intact. We got this.
There has not been as much of a trend among most small businesses and mid-sized businesses in this country to stop hiring white people.
Well, those companies just aren't racist. That's all this shows, right? Obviously, they're the true ones, the ones that know that they should just be hiring more white people. That's how we know.
That's a good thing. Instead, we're dealing with a top-down artificial system of anti-white discrimination that only the very biggest companies are engaging in. Of course, it's also true that, you know, most companies could not possibly afford to ban the hiring of white people. That would leave them with a pool of qualified applicants so small that they would go under within a week. They couldn't do it. So if you're looking for the kind of glass half empty interpretation on all this data, you might say that the companies that could afford to stop hiring white people did, and the ones that couldn't afford it didn't. Either way, there's no way to minimize what's happening. Think about all the
Wait, I'm sorry. Aren't you the meritocracy crew? Shouldn't that be your spin in all this? Like, isn't this a direct example of people being hired because they were the most qualified? Isn't that what the corporations do? Isn't that the entire American dream? Isn't that why the whole system works the way it does? Hasn't every single one of these people of color, like every black applicant, weren't they the best qualified members for their jobs? And that's why they managed to succeed in the corporate world? That's the story we're always told every single fucking day by the right. So what changed here? They just weren't white. So, I mean, by that, if I was to infer, if I was to try and assume what Matt Walsh is trying to say here, I mean, I would come to the conclusion pretty readily that that's what's going on, right? That that's actually the issue here, that you want more white people to be hired exclusively, and when they don't do that, that's racism. That's the real racism.
White people who were passed over for jobs. Think about how many careers were completely derailed in many cases before they even started because of this. Think about the cultural consequences of having flooded the market with legions of underqualified workers at companies that and these aren't just any companies. These are companies that make our jets and fly our planes and design our electronics. This is a massive and unprecedented catastrophe. Nothing like...
What? No, this is... You're just doing fucking unbridled racism right now. What the fuck? You have to be concerned, okay? There are black people, native people, who are being hired at the highest levels now for companies that decide whether we live or die. You could have a non-white pilot. Would you get on that plane? I'm sorry, I need to see it. I need to see it. Before we take off, I need to see that the plane, the man, and it has to be a fucking man, the man flying the plane better fucking be white. All right? And not mixed, not white passing, none of that shit. I'm talking fucking Anglo-Saxon.
At the same time, we do need to recognize that this discrimination is artificial. There is no consensus in this country that white people aren't worth hiring.
Yeah, with the British last name.
Most businesses seem to understand that discrimination against white people is immoral, not to mention bad for business.
You didn't see Denzel Washington save everybody else. That is true, actually. Denzel did save an entire plane full of people using cocaine, liquor, and some other stuff, right? I learned a new drug because, like, it's John Goodman who's like his dealer in that movie, and he's like putting coke in cigarettes or something. They call that something else, and that also gives him, you know, superpowers to land planes upside down and stuff.
Business or both.
Sorry, I don't want to get too deep.
Whatever the case, they're not doing it. It's the corporations at the very top of the heap, the ones with the most power, and the lobbyists who can control public policy. They're the ones who are pushing this. They're the ones driving the overt anti-white racism that we now see every day and everywhere in society.
By the way, I just want to get ahead of this because there's going to be people who are obviously like, Lance, are you buying into the academic standpoint that racism exists or privilege plus power? Like, it's obviously, it sucks that like white supremacists like Matt Walsh have completely ruined the ability to have actual discussions on this topic and trying to explain to people that like the very concept of race and racism itself was designed for a hierarchical system that obviously benefited white supremacy, and that whiteness itself just as a thing, they're like the very idea of white people is actually about othering other groups, and it's that which are not white, and there's a whole thing about proximity to whiteness, and then how close you are to that in any given time can change whether or not you're one category, say like Italians and Irish are considered white at any given time, all that kind of shit, right? But leave that all aside. Of course, you can be discriminated against, even as a white person. You can be discriminated against. People can be bigoted towards you, can be prejudiced towards you, all that kind of stuff. Is this demonstrating itself, however, in a systemic level? Are people generally, because of the color of their skin being white, are they being suddenly over-policed by the judicial system? Do they have a higher percentage of being shot by police if they have negative encounters? If they go into the criminal justice system, are they more often able to afford or not afford bail? If they use drugs at the same rate, say, as their comparable groups, how severe are their penalties going to be? How big is the sentencing going to be? Are they profiled every single time they go into a store? Are they suddenly suspicious if they look indigenous, that they're going to be stealing something from that store? All those kind of things, those are different lived experiences that I myself as a white person did not experience, right? Maybe some white people have, and certainly there are overlaps with other different kinds of discrimination. You can be white and poor, so if you enter a store and suddenly they think that you're poor, they might try and police you more, stuff like that. But it's never been on the basis of my skin, you know? It's never been like, oh shit, yeah, no, yeah, we got a black person here, we just got to make sure you follow him, he could be here to steal a TV or something, I don't know. Like, those things are what people of color have been trying to explain to other groups that may not experience that. And the same thing can be exclusive to different forms of discrimination that happen to certain forms and groups, right? That kind of thing. And just learning about that itself is not racism. It's not racism to learn that someone else has had a harder time because of something, and then you can agree, yeah, that's unfair. That sucks. I don't think that you should not be able to get an apartment or a rental as easily as I am, simply because you happen to be visibly indigenous, because all of a sudden they think that you might be an alcoholic, or they think that you might have a drug problem, or they think that you might not be able to pay rent because they're being racist, because they are racistly objectifying you and discriminating against you and saying, well, we're not, you don't have to say it out loud, by the way. You don't have to actually be like, yeah, sorry, you're native, so we're not going to give you the suite. No, if you did that, they would have a case in court, right? But if you just don't do it, you're just like, okay, so who are the 3 people who applied? 2 white people, 1 indigenous person. Oh, okay, so what are the 2 jobs of the white people? What do they do? Let's give them the apartment, you know? That sucks. And if someone who is indigenous will tell you that, then you can listen to that and be like, oh yeah, that does suck. We should probably work on, broadly speaking, changing a lot of things then about society. Why do we discriminate? Why are we programmed that way? Why do we think that? Why when I was in fucking, elementary school, were kids who definitely didn't understand concepts like extreme fucking systemic racism talking about how the natives are always drunk and they get high on gasoline? Why were kids telling me that? Why? Because their parents were telling them that. Because their parents were saying that, they were saying that. And because they were saying that, they were telling other kids that. And because other kids were saying that, they might not even have a full concept of what they're saying or what the idea behind that is. It's the same thing we see those little kids going up to Sneeko and being like, yeah, we hate women, right? And I'm like, no. It's memes. Chill. It's like, oh yeah, okay, sorry, not women, but the transgenders, right? We love all people. Yeah, but like kill the gays, right? And it's like, no. I've just been memeing. That's why, I'm memeing when I talk about killing gay people and all that kind of stuff. I'm doing it because I think it's funny. I don't want you to genuinely go out and kill gay people. I'm like, oh shit, what have I done? It's a learned trait, exactly.
Yesterday we talked about this anti-white bias in the courts, but really it's all over the place. It's the reason white people can't get jobs in many cases, the reason why many white people are unable to provide for their families. They fall into despair and die of suicide and drug overdoses at a rate that...
That is entirely true, that there are large percentages of white people who are suffering, for sure. What does that have to do with them experiencing racial subjugation on a daily basis? Could it have a lot more to do with a lot of other factors? There's like, why don't you want to raise the minimum wage? That'll help poor white people. Why don't you want to strengthen unions? That'll help poor white people. Why don't you want to have a jobs program, a mandatory jobs program, or a government jobs program that has jobs available to anyone who wants them? That'll help more poor white people, right? It's not that they're going into applications and they're like, oh shit, you're white. Yeah, sorry, no, I thought you were black. Yeah, nah, we can't do this one. Yeah, no. Not, I mean, no, I'm sure you're qualified. It's just like, yeah, no, sorry, we're only looking for a black guy. Yeah, but like better luck somewhere else. I don't know, you know.
Would have been unfathomable just a few years ago. Bloomberg didn't make any of that clear, but that's exactly what is happening. Now, why is it happening? I mean, why are these corporations pursuing this anti-white, anti-capitalist, flagrantly immoral agenda of mass racial discrimination?
How is it anti-capitalist? What about this? This is supposed to be your field. This is meritocracy, right? Aren't all these people being hired because they're the most qualified? Or is that not a thing now? It's only a thing when you're white, apparently.
What possible explanation can there be for this? Well, if you look at Bloomberg's website, there's some suggestion of an explanation. You know, we all have a lot on our schedules with how much we have to do.
But you'll never know.
In other words, as BLM rioters lit major cities in this country on fire, Bloomberg reached out to companies like Apple and Amazon, told them that they'd better stop hiring white people. Told them that we're going to be watching you. Better.
Holy shit. Total breaking news. But if you happen to be a X user like myself, Twitter's new private policy takes effect on the 29th of September. It gives X the right to use all of your posts, including your private messages, all of your data, including your phone, email, biometrics, including face scans and eye scans, to train their AI and to share with any partner that they want. Is he fucking Elon Musk gonna be satisfied when the whole thing is just gone?
Maybe make structural reforms based on institutional cucking status would help both Matt Walsh and Benoit Sharpener.
Balthazar, thank you for the donation. I will adhere to your cucking status hiring policies. I'm prepared. We will have a full Simon Peggery.
Not be hiring any white people. That was the import of what they were saying. And now 3 years later, Bloomberg...
No, it wasn't. Not a single person has done that yet. There's been no, so we're specifically going to be firing our white staff and hiring only people of color. And yeah, it's just, I'm sorry, but Black Lives Matter, you know how it is, right?
Bloomberg is gloating that these companies did in fact stop hiring white people. But they're not mentioning that they pressured these companies to do that.
They never boasted that they were excited that they no longer hire white people. They were saying that there is a very large difference between the amount of white people who work in these companies and the amount of non-white people who work in these companies. And so, because there was a lot of attention being paid to things like systemic racism towards non-white people, that they wanted to make an effort to hire more non-white people on their teams, to have more diversity. All the studies show that a more diverse company actually has better results, both in its production, its outcome, and the amount of money it makes. So there's that. And that's about all there is. They didn't fire their white staff and replace them. There wasn't any of that. They didn't even promote beyond 2 percentage points non-white people to positions of power. Managerial, executive, CEOs, none of that. So the power structure itself is still white, Matt. It's all white. It's all white. You don't have to worry there. 2 percentage points was the change, you know? You don't have to freak out. This is not the end of the world.
So this is activism journalism at its finest. It's a case study in it. Now, this is not to blame Bloomberg for what's happening, of course. Bloomberg was merely taking advantage of a vulnerability that already existed. They were one of many major media outlets that saw that major corporations feared one thing above all else, which is that there would be an article written accusing them of being racist. The biggest corporations in the United States were more worried about being called bigots than they were about hiring competent employees. Bloomberg saw a market opportunity and they took it, and that's why they're celebrating right now. Now, for the rest of us, for people who care about the future of this country, this isn't just a wake-up call. It's a reason to ask every company in the S&P 100 where they stand on the information that Bloomberg is currently reporting. Do they also hate hundreds of millions of American citizens solely on the basis of how they look? Or do they recognize that what's happening here is a grave injustice, one that is endangering everyone in the country and ruining millions of lives? Corporations need to start answering those questions. And if they can, it's time to treat them the same way Joe Biden's DOJ treats quote-unquote white supremacists. We need to stop buying their products.
There it is.
We need to stop putting up with their holistic approaches to anti-white racial discrimination. It's time instead to destroy them.
Woo!
Thanks for checking out this video.
Wow, spicy stuff. So yeah, that's quite an ending. That's aggressive, you know? Like, holy shit, it's time to destroy them. Like what, the companies that didn't actually discriminate against white people, the companies that didn't fire their white staff to replace them with non-white people, the companies that hired additional people. Again, this is in addition, it's not subtraction. 1 + 1 is 2. They hired more people of color in the companies, not to executive and managerial positions, but just in the companies themselves. The managerial executive positions are still dominated by white people. The ruling class is still of a white variety, but yeah, I guess destroy them. He wants to be a supervillain. He wants to be a lot of things. I think I got to put out a Matt Walsh documentary, you know, like the fall of Matt Walsh, just so people know the timeline, because everyone's kind of just like gotten into this world where it's like, whoa, Matt Walsh, he's the what is a woman guy, right? And he's that big conservative thinker, and he's the one who talks, and he's like, it's like, no, he should be known as like the diaper fetish Nazi guy. Like, honestly, the one who wants to talk about how 16 years is the ideal impregnation age, and that impregnating teenagers is not bad as long as they're married, and you know, and fucking he judges actual Nazis in diapers wrestling each other, and sells little baby dolls of himself as a baby, a fucking weird ass baby in a diaper, and wants your children to play with it. That's who the fuck he is. You know, that's Matt Walsh. I think if a lot of that was known, he wouldn't even be on centrist podcasts. Like, I think Joe Rogan would be like, what, that dude? No, the guy's fucking, I don't know. I don't want the Nazi diaper dude, you know? Like, I'd rather just, you know, can't we get on a UFC fighter or something like that? You know?
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback, because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
Thank you so much for watching, everybody. This show is produced by amazing people like you, and if you want to help us out, please consider donating over at patreon.com/theserfs. The show is made possible thanks to Amazing Fletch, Anna Loves Riley, Ariane McCarthy, Cheryl Alvarez, Doug Cady, Everything Important, Hagbard Celine, Laminia Panza, Matthew Scarborough, Multimondi, Omni, Peanut Butter Blondie, Political Pappy, Quiet 185, Rachel K, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Ruby K, Sir Nickus, Spinach Monster, Stellar Vision, Sebastian Demo, Tech Tink, Trevbot EXE, Words Greenwood, and not to mention all of the amazing and fabulous people you now see before you.